Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Dillian Whyte says it was a close fight with Tyson Fury. So we'll get to that statement, which I think some people will find delusional, and then on to a few thoughts, because questions, linger now about what should Dillian Whyte do next. And certainly there is the question, is he on the decline? The punch resistance, is it going? And where to next? Because surely can't be on pay-per-view, at least in his next fight. And where does he go? Because remembering, coming off a loss now, he's got no promoter. He doesn't have an organization where he's got a deal. And this is the beauty for him of, at least he's been able to do these fight-by-fight deals. So certainly questions about what happens, because surely his services will have to come at a discount after that knockout loss. The third knockout loss of his career. So starting first with Dillian Whyte's take on the fight to BBC, saying, "I don't think there was a lot in the fight. It was a close fight. It was one slip and then I got caught with the shot. It is what it is, man. I don't feel like I was outclassed, or he was this level and I was that level." I don't really know what to make of that comment, because I think that's a delusional statement. I think it was clear Tyson Fury was the better fighter in there. This is a guy who didn't really get out of first gear. He didn't really have to sort of change up too much. Dillian Whyte didn't put him under the sort of pressure that we thought he might be able to. Fury completely nullified him, didn't get out of first gear. I mean, Tyson Fury controlled proceedings basically throughout. The only round that you could maybe argue for Dillian Whyte was the first round, where he was southpaw, and there really wasn't a lot of action between the pair. And Dillian Whyte wasn't bossing that round, and certainly through the rest of the fight, Tyson Fury, through his height and his reach, controlled things. And I think there was a different level between the pair. And ultimately, Dillian Whyte looked like he was gassing towards the end of this fight, where he was stopped inside 6 rounds. And, again, another uppercut loss. And on closer examination of the punch, certainly there's been a lot of commentary floating around that Tyson Fury didn't really sort of connect as clean as maybe we originally thought. And that raises, I guess, the first point. Is Dillian Whyte on the decline? And certainly, is his punch resistance, is it fading now? Because I think you have to ask that question. And now he's been knocked out 3 times, all with uppercuts. Anthony Joshua, Alexander Povetkin, and also now Tyson Fury. He's been dropped with uppercuts before as well, notably also Oscar Rivas. Joseph Parker had him down as well in their fight. So Dillian Whyte, you have to ask the question about the chin. Is the sort of the wars that he's had in some fights and also in the gym, famously has been in hard sparring sessions, has that all caught up with him? Because what I saw was not a Dillian Whyte at the peak of his powers last night. I think even if you put aside the element that Tyson Fury was able to nullify him to a large extent because of the height and reach, good big man beats a smaller good big man. But I think we also probably saw that Dillian Whyte, at least, and I know this is, some people will say, well, this is hindsight 2020 sort of stuff, but on the performance in there, just with other elements of it, he looked like he was a man past his best. And I think there are differences. When he got knocked out to Alexander Povetkin a couple of years ago, there was a difference in that fight because he was bossing that fight. And some of what we saw in that fight was some of the best that Dillian Whyte had ever fought. And then he was knocked out of the blue. But we had a different sort of scenario on this one. Dillian Whyte was really ineffective. And certainly he looked a little off balance. And sometimes he can look off balance, but his legs didn't look great. He just looked out of ideas. He looked like he was gassing towards the end of that fight, gaping mouth, and he just didn't have an idea how to crack the Tyson Fury code, which you have to partly credit to Fury, but also I do think there's a case to say Dillian Whyte is now probably a bit past prime. And some people may not like that, may not like to hear that. But I think at this point you have to ask that question. Is Dillian Whyte past his best? And I guess another question, should he have actually taken that fight with Anthony Joshua a couple of years ago when he had the opportunity to fight Anthony Joshua at Wembley in 2019? He passed on that. He was made offers, but said, I know my worth. I'm going to get paid more. I'm not going to take short money. And that was a shot at 3 belts. So he's waited an extra couple of years. He's got this title fight against Tyson Fury. He's gone in there, probably put up the worst performance he's put up, at least since the Marius Vuk fight, where he didn't look that good. He was out of shape and disinterested. But this was a top-level fight. There's sort of no excuses coming into this. Dillian Whyte said, best training, best camp. I felt good. This was a good camp. I'm ready. I'm going to beat this guy. And he just didn't have an answer. And while he might have got paid a couple of extra $1 million for this fight, as opposed to that Joshua fight that he was offered a few years ago, you might have arguably said he probably was better and more in his prime and peak Dillian Whyte at that point, and maybe would have had a better shot to beat Anthony Joshua. I'm not saying he would have, but I think that would have been probably a more competitive fight at that time than now. And it's going to be a bit of a hard sell now, because where does Dillian Whyte go? Honestly, where does he go? And, we like these big fights. We like them to occur. And there's obviously going to be a loser. And often the scrutiny goes a lot on the loser and what they do, especially if there's not a great performance. And this was not a great performance. But it's not to say that Dillian Whyte is finished. But I certainly think that the matchmaking is going to have to be quite careful, because watching that last night and remembering he was meant to fight Otto Wallin towards the end of last year, there was an injury, he pulled out, and then he ended up coming into this fight. Arguably on the strength of last night's performance against Tyson Fury, remembering Otto Wallin's the bigger man. He's a tricky southpaw. He can move. He can box. I even said at the time, it's not a good style matchup, and actually it's probably going to be quite competitive. And on the strength of having seen Dillian Whyte face a good big man who was taller and utilised those height and reach advantages, I think, those sorts of fights against Otto Wallin, I think arguably he could lose to an Otto Wallin, but I don't expect to see him in that sort of fight next. And it's going to be interesting. Who's going to pick him up now? Arguably, whoever does, if it's going to be Sky or DAZN, maybe an outside chance, Frank Warren with BT, there is going to be a case they're going to have to try to rebuild him, rehabilitate his image with the public, because he's been knocked out on the biggest stage in front of 94,000 fans, and he didn't look good in that fight. There weren't moments where you sort of thought he's really getting on top here, he's really putting it on Fury, he's a good chance to win this fight. Tyson Fury was largely controlling proceedings throughout. So probably a tune-up when he does come back. But you have to ask the question, is he done on pay-per-view? At least for now he is. And I think whenever he does go back on to a bigger fight, it may not be on pay-per-view. The broadcasters may not be willing to put him on pay-per-view at this point, unless he's the B-side and it's against a rising fighter. And that could be the sort of fights that are there for Dillian Whyte going forward. Dillian Whyte, though, will, with his ego and all that sort of stuff, he will still think, I'm one of still the best heavyweights in the world. And maybe he is. I mean, we have to recognize styles make fights. In Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte, that style matchup played out all in Fury's favor. He made Whyte look average. But apart from that, there were signs that Dillian Whyte was not at his best. And actually, that fight kind of did resemble, in parts, when you have a rising sort of fighter against a past prime fighter, and you have the rising fighter basically sort of outclassing and winning a fight against the guy who's meant to be a resume builder. There was kind of that vibe about that overall with the fight between Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte. Obviously, these are two top fighters in the heavyweight division, so it's not that scenario, but it kind of played out like that scenario. So Dillian Whyte going forward, I think the price that he demands for his services just got smaller. And he probably won't acknowledge that. He'll probably say, look, I put up a really good effort, and he is saying it was a close fight, but it wasn't really a fight that he was in or winning. And that's the thing, because Fury was controlling the action for the most part. Dillian Whyte was landing some body shots as part of his strategy, but there really wasn't much else doing. He wasn't landing a lot of clean headshots. He just couldn't get in. He wasn't effective. And we've all now seen, for the third time, him get stopped by an uppercut. A punch that he is clearly susceptible to. I mean, what are they doing to try shore up his defenses? Sort of seems to be, he gets a bit tired, starts leaning forward, and he gets caught with the shot. We've seen it time and time again now. And people know fighting this guy that a punch is going to be there. It's like Tyson Fury kept that uppercut on reserve for when he needed it. And when he unfurled it, obviously it did the damage. So I think the punch resistance is declining. And actually, remembering that was an 80-20 split, but 10% of that purse from that fight got put aside. So Dillian Whyte only ended up getting a 15% slice of that pie for that fight. Still, obviously, to you and I, it's massive money. Millions and millions of dollars. But that could be the last big payday that Dillian Whyte has in his career. And I don't want to completely write him off, because obviously this is something that can happen after a fight. People go way over the top. But I do think there were signs of decline from Dillian Whyte. But it's going to have to be right fights, right style matchups. And where he has excelled, it's generally been against guys that are about the same size or even a little bit smaller. But, you know, he has wheeled himself to wins before. He's got himself out of jail in that second Chisora rematch where he was down on 2 of the 3 cards. He had a lucky escape against Joseph Parker. But obviously, the luck ran out in this fight with Tyson Fury. The physical attributes of Fury were just too much. And it made Dillian Whyte look very basic, very pedestrian. And his performance overall was pedestrian. What do you think next is for Dillian Whyte? And do you think he's delusional for saying it was a close fight, as he says? Where to now? Who's going to pick him up? And is he going to have to take a haircut on the pay? I think he will. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.